Incorrect. 450 volts. You promise he's not. It won't.
Please continue with the procedure.
You said it hurts, but it's because it's like it says they're dangerous in a shot. It'll be all right. Yeah.
Please continue. Okay, I think we'll discontinue the experiment there.
All of the subjects were told the true nature of the experiment was to see how they would respond to authority, and that it would eventually form part of this show.
He is okay.
I can tell you, yeah, he's absolutely fine. You actually weren't administering electric shocks to him at all. He is.
In the original Milgram experiment, psychologists were asked to predict how many people would continue to the point that they were administering the highest shock on the board. Their prediction was 1/10%. They were wrong. The results of our experiment were almost identical to the original. Over 50% of participants continued up to 450 volts. The majority of people will administer lethal electric shocks just because a guy in a white coat is telling them to.
450 volts.
450 volts.
450 volts.
450.
So after the results of the Milgram experiment, I've now chosen my 4 subjects that will go forward for the heist.
Okay, the rest of that is on the television show. All right, so those results have been repeated at least in 12 studies that I know of, a couple done in England, one done in France, a couple of them modified just this year, I believe, in the United States, but they had to modify the experiment quite a bit. But what turns out is when you ask people to administer the shock all the way to 450 volts, how many people did it? Over 50%, that's right. Yeah, you would have guessed. Wouldn't you have guessed much less? Okay, now I got 3 questions for you. Were the individuals that were pushing the buttons, do you think they were conflicted about administering the shocks? Did they seem upset to you? Yeah. Did any of them seem happy, like they're like psychos or something like that? No. They all seemed conflicted, right? Rather deeply conflicted. So no one liked pushing the button. Were they required to administer the shocks? No, that's what the guy in the white lab coat kept saying, right? But were they actually required? No. What was the consequence if they stopped? Yeah, nothing. So why didn't they stop? They did not like it at all. They knew deep down it was probably wrong. Why didn't they stop? Yeah, that's the big question there. We were talking about those rules that you're taught when you're growing up. Some of the rules you're taught are to trust people, right? That's something, if you have kids, you teach your kids to trust people. I try to teach my kids to trust people. You're taught to obey authority. You're taught to, get along. Don't be a difficult person. You're taught to respect authority. You're taught to defer to expertise. If you see a guy with a PhD in a lab coat, he's an expert, so do what they say. You're also taught not to hurt people. That's the conflict in this story, in this experiment. You've got one value, don't hurt people. You got these other values on the other side, and for a lot of them, these other values are outweighing the others. Now, these are the kinds of rules that I was talking about, the kinds of rules that can have significant impact on society, a significant impact on people. You have some rules inside of you that aren't having this kind of impact on other people, but you have some rules inside of you that could be having an impact on your own personal success as a student and all the success that follows after being a student. I'd like to talk a little bit about those. All right. To do that, I'm going to have you go through a little exercise here. All right, now, to do this exercise, what I want you to do is first, I'd like you to think about the people that raised you, okay? Think about the people that raised you, if maybe your parents, or if you grew up in a single-family home, or maybe if your grandparents raised you, think about that. Think about your best friends, the ones that had the... I'm trying to get you to picture in your mind the people that helped make you who you are, All right, you know what I'm talking about there? Okay, it's going to be a little different for every, if you were raised by a great family, that's who it was. If you were raised by some psycho family, that's who it was. We're not trying to measure the quality of the family, just those people. If you were raised by a pack of wolves, think of those wolves, okay? That's who you're thinking of right now. All right. Now, a picture having dinner with those folks. Maybe there's 4 or 5 or 15 people. I don't know how many there are in your life, all right? And I want you to answer these 11 questions. We'll go through each one together, and I want you to keep track of which ones fall into the darker blue column, the one on the left, all right? You know what you're doing here? Somebody nod. Yeah, you know what we're going to do here. Okay. Okay, the first question is, when you're sitting down with those folks, the people that raised you, if you use formal language with them, if you got in a discussion and you started talking like a professor, is that seen by that group as pretentious and conceited, or is that encouraged by that group? Let's go to the second question. When you talk about studying with that group and how many hours you study and that type of thing, is studying seen as being less difficult than real work or as difficult as real work? When you are expressing your opinions with that group, is it discouraged or is it encouraged? When you are thinking critically about issues and very deeply about issues, and you're expressing those ideas with them, is it treated as suspicious or is it praised and encouraged? When you talk about college, is college with that group thought of as optional or is it thought of as mandatory? When you're at these events, when you're at this dinner, do people ask you how college is going? Is that a common question or is it a rare question? When that group that you were raised by talks about leadership and leaders, do they think of all leaders as men, as a masculine trait? Or do they think of leaders as open to men and women? When you are being intelligent, when you are being articulate, is that seen as something that men do not do? Or is that seen as something that men and women should do? Well-educated people, do you see them, or does that group see them as nerdy or as cool? When you're disagreeing with somebody of authority, is that seen as disrespectful or is that seen as okay? And when you have different ideas that the group is not used to, when you're sharing new ideas with them, do they respond to them as strange or do they respond to them as interesting? All right, now, if you ended up with a lot of, well, let's just do a show of hands here. Richard, can you give us a little light in the room here? All right. Did you get all these questions? Did you add up how many you have in the darker blue column? All right. How many in the room had at least one from that column? Raise your hand if you had at least one from that column. All right, so, yeah. Okay, how many had at least two? Raise your hand. Okay. Yeah. And I presume a lot of you guys kept going on. We could keep going on with 3, 4, and 5. All right, these are kinds of rules that you learn in your socialization process. Some of you were raised in homes that really talk about college as mandatory. Some of you are raised in homes that talk about college as an option. Now, when you have this kind of inside of you, this idea, let's say there are two students. One was told his whole life college is mandatory, you have to finish. The other one was told college is optional. If you finish, good. If not, okay. And things get really hard, which one is more likely to quit? The one that was taught it's optional.